Rebecca slammed the door shut behind her, eyes blazing with fury. "I've had enough, Ben. If you don't cut her out of our lives, I will." Ben looked up from his phone, startled. "Amy, my sister? What the hell happened now, Rebecca?" "She's trying to ruin us," Rebecca snapped, her voice trembling with emotion. "What are you talking about?" Ben asked, putting down his phone and standing up. "Tonight was supposed to be our anniversary dinner. It was just for us," Rebecca said. "But Amy had to show up uninvited and create a scene." Ben sighed. "What did she do this time?" Rebecca crossed her arms, anger and frustration clear on her face. "She made a spectacle, drunk and obnoxious. She picked a fight with the waiter, embarrassed us in front of all those people." "She's going through a lot, Rebecca," Ben said, his tone defensive. "She's not herself lately." "That's your excuse every time." Rebecca's voice was rising. "You always take her side, Ben." "She's family, Rebecca. She needs me." Rebecca shook her head, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "This isn't the first time she's pulled something like this. Remember our wedding?" Ben's face tightened at the mention of their wedding. "That was different," he mumbled, knowing full well it wasn't. "Different?" Rebecca echoed. "She tried to hijack it, Ben. She made that day all about her." Ben opened his mouth to speak, but didn't have the words. He knew Rebecca was right. Amy had always been a tornado, drawing attention and creating chaos wherever she went. "You never see it," Rebecca continued, softer now. "You never see what she's doing to us, to you." "Rebecca," Ben began, but she cut him off. "No, listen to me." Rebecca's voice was low but firm. "Every time she disrupts our lives, you excuse it. You say she needs help, that she's family, that things will change, but they never do." Ben rubbed his temples, feeling the weight of his sister's actions pressing on him. "What do you want me to do, Rebecca? She's my sister." "I want you to set boundaries, Ben," Rebecca said, her tone pleading. "I want you to put us first for once." Ben looked into his wife's eyes, seeing the hurt and exhaustion there. He knew Rebecca was right. Amy was a problem he'd been avoiding for too long. "I'll talk to her," Ben said finally. "I'll make sure she knows she can't keep doing this." Rebecca nodded but didn't seem convinced. "It's not just about talking, Ben. You need to be firm." "I will," Ben promised, though even he wasn't sure he believed it. "I just need time to figure it out." Rebecca shook her head, turning away. "Time's running out, Ben." The room fell silent, the weight of their confrontation hanging in the air like a storm cloud. As Ben watched Rebecca walk away, he couldn't help but feel the intensifying rift between them, a rift that his sister had helped carve deeper and deeper over the years. The morning sun streamed through the bedroom window as I woke up, feeling the tension from last night still hanging in the air. Ben was already up, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee. I knew I had to address the issue before it consumed our weekend. "Amy called," Ben said as I entered the kitchen, his tone already defensive. "Of course she did. What does she want now?" I asked, trying to keep my frustration in check. "She says she's lonely and asked if she could stay over this weekend," Ben said, avoiding my eyes. I could feel the anger rising in me. "Ben, we've been planning this romantic getaway for weeks. We need this time alone." "I know, but she sounded really upset." "Maybe just this once?" Ben pleaded. "It's never just once with her," I snapped. "She's always here, imposing on our lives. We barely get any time to ourselves." Ben sighed. "I'll talk to her. Maybe she won't stay the whole weekend." "She shouldn't be here at all," I said, my voice firm. "We deserve this time together, Ben. You promised." Before Ben could respond, there was a knock at the door. I felt a sinking feeling in my stomach as he opened it to reveal Amy standing there, a suitcase in hand. "Surprise!" Amy said, a forced smile on her face. "I figured you'd say yes, so I came over early." I shot Ben a look, and he grimaced. "Amy, we talked about this. You can't just show up uninvited." "Oh, come on, Ben. It's just one weekend," Amy said, brushing past him into the living room. "It's never just one weekend, Amy," I said, trying to keep my cool. "We've had this planned for a long time." "I know, and I'm sorry, but I really need this. I'm so lonely and bored," Amy whined. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "You knew we had plans. This isn't fair to us." Amy rolled her eyes. "You're always so dramatic, Rebecca. It's just a few days. I won't be a burden." "You are a burden, Amy," I said, my patience wearing thin. "We need our space." "Ben, do you hear how she talks to me?" Amy turned to her brother, trying to play the victim. "Amy, enough. Rebecca's right. You can't keep doing this, Ben said, surprising me with his firmness. Amy's eyes narrowed, but she forced a smile. Fine, I'll find somewhere else to stay. I'm sorry, Amy, but it's for the best, Ben said, standing his ground. As Amy left, I felt a mix of relief and apprehension. This was only a temporary victory, and I knew she would be back. But for now, we had our weekend house, and I hoped it would be enough to remind Ben of what really mattered. We'll have a great weekend, Ben said softly, taking my hand. I hope so, I replied, squeezing his hand. We need this. It had only been a few days since our brief weekend reprieve. That morning, I walked into the living room to find Ben pacing back and forth, cell phone pressed to his ear. His face was tense, lined with worry. She lost her job and apartment, I heard him say. My heart sank. She what? I interrupted, eyes wide with disbelief. Ben held up a hand, signaling for me to wait. Yeah, okay, I'll come get you. He hung up and faced me, his expression filled with concern. Amy's in trouble, Rebecca. She lost her job and her place. She needs somewhere to stay. She said it's temporary. I don't believe this, I said, anger boiling up inside me. She always needs something. When will it end? Rebecca, she's my sister. I can't just leave her out there, Ben argued. But this isn't fair to us, Ben. We've done more than enough for her, I insisted, crossing my arms. I know, but she's family. Just for a little while, I promise. Gripping the back of a chair, I took a deep breath. Fine, but it better be temporary. Ben nodded and quickly left to pick her up. A couple of hours later, Amy walked in, her face looking worn but with that familiar smirk playing at the corners of her lips. Thanks for letting me stay, you guys, she said, dropping her bags by the couch. I bit my tongue, forcing a smile. Amy, if you're going to stay here, you need to follow the house rules. Oh, of course, Amy said sweetly, though her eyes betrayed her insincerity. Days turned into weeks, and soon it felt like Amy was becoming a permanent fixture in our home. She claimed she was looking for jobs, but more often than not, she was lounging around, watching TV. Any luck with the job search? I asked one afternoon, unable to hide the sarcasm in my voice. Amy barely looked up from her phone. Not yet. It's tough out there. It's been a month, Amy. You need to put in more effort, I said, trying to restrain my frustration. Do you think you could maybe ease off, Rebecca? She snapped back, glaring at me. I'm doing my best. Ben walked in just as the argument was escalating. What's going on? Amy's been here for a month already, Ben. She needs to find a job and move out, I said firmly. I'm trying, Ben, but she's constantly on my case, Amy said, her voice dripping with false innocence. Ben sighed, looking torn. Amy, you do need to find a solution soon. This was supposed to be temporary. Yeah, I know. I'm working on it, Amy replied, a hint of annoyance in her tone. Later that night, I confronted Ben in our bedroom. She's exploiting your kindness, Ben. She's not trying to leave. I know it's hard, but she's still my sister, Ben said, his voice weary. I just need more time to figure out what to do. If she stays any longer, it's going to hurt us, I said, my voice breaking slightly. Ben sighed deeply. I'll talk to her again. We'll figure this out. As I lay in bed that night, listening to the sounds of Amy moving around in the next room, I realized that talk alone wouldn't solve this. I had to take a stand, not just for my sake, but for our marriage. A few days after our tense conversation, I decided it was time to take matters into my own hands. Amy's presence in our home was driving a wedge between Ben and me, and I was determined to get to the bottom of her manipulations. I needed proof. One morning, when Amy had gone out for a supposed job interview, I sat down at Ben's computer. With a mix of guilt and resolve, I started sifting through their shared bank statements and emails. It didn't take long for the patterns to emerge. Amy's constant withdrawals, extravagant purchases, all under the guise of needing help. I heard the front door open and quickly closed the browser. Amy walked in, looking far too cheerful for someone supposedly struggling. How was the interview? I asked, forcing a smile. Oh, you know how it is, she replied flippantly. They said they'd call me. That evening after Ben got home, I waited for Amy to head to her room before approaching him. Ben, we need to talk, I said, my voice hushed but urgent. About what? He asked, already sensing my serious tone. I've been looking into things, I began, pulling out the printed bank statements. Amy hasn't been honest with us. Look at these withdrawals, these purchases. She's been manipulating you, Ben. Ben's face paled as he scanned the pages. She said she needed help with basic expenses. I didn't know. I know she's your sister, but she's been lying to us, I said softly but firmly. Ben shook his head, disbelief and hurt in his eyes. Why would she do this? I think she's taking advantage of your kindness. She knows you'll always come to her rescue, I said. But this has to stop, Ben, for us. I need to talk to her, he said, still processing the shock. That night, as we sat down for dinner, Ben decided it was time to confront Amy. I could tell he was nervous, but he had to face the truth. Amy, we need to talk about your situation here, Ben said, his voice steady but strained. What do you mean? Amy asked, her eyes narrowing. Rebecca found some things today, Ben said, sliding the bank statements across the table. You've been using my money to fund your lifestyle. This isn't just about rent or food. Amy's face flushed with anger. How dare you snoop through my personal business, she yelled, glaring at me. It's our business when you're exploiting us, I shot back. You need to leave, Amy. This can't go on. Ben nodded, finally standing firm. Rebecca's right. You need to find another place to stay. We can't do this anymore. Amy's expression twisted with rage and desperation. You're choosing her over me? Your own sister? I have to put my marriage first, Amy. That Ben said quietly but resolutely. You need to go. Amy stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her. The weight of the confrontation hung in the air, but for the first time in a long while, I felt a glimmer of hope. I'm proud of you, I said to Ben, reaching out to hold his hand. We'll get through this, he replied, squeezing my hand. As we sat in the quiet of our now peaceful home, I knew that this was just the beginning. Amy's departure would bring challenges, but it was a necessary step towards reclaiming our lives. And this time, I was ready for whatever came next. Amy's departure left a palpable void in the house, but the tension between Ben and me had only slightly eased. The damage had been done, and trust had been breached. I knew I had to take additional steps to ensure that Amy's presence in our lives was permanently diminished. One evening, an idea struck me. I needed to gather irrefutable evidence of Amy's deceit. I decided to lay a trap. If Amy's true nature was exposed in front of friends and family, it would become impossible for Ben to continue making excuses for her. Ben, I've been thinking, I said while making dinner. We should throw a surprise birthday party for you next week. A nice gathering with our close friends and family. A party? Ben seemed hesitant. With everything going on? Yes, exactly because of that, I insisted. We need something good to bring people together. Plus, it'll be fun. After a little more convincing, Ben agreed. The plan was set into motion. I sent out invitations and made sure Amy got the information. Next, I concocted a plan with a few close friends to help gather more concrete proof of Amy's manipulations. On the day of the party, our house was filled with laughter, chatter, and the clinking of glasses. I moved through the rooms, greeting guests and setting everything in place. Amy arrived late, fashionably dressed, but with an air of entitlement that made my blood boil. The moment came when I took the stage, tapping a glass to get everyone's attention. I just want to say a few words, I began, smiling at Ben, who looked slightly uncomfortable. Today we celebrate not just Ben's birthday, but the people who matter most in our lives. I gestured subtly to my friend Laura, who nodded and started projecting the documents I had gathered. Bank statements, emails, credit card bills, all with Amy's name and traces of her lies popped up on the screen. Amy, why don't you tell everyone about these? I said, my voice calm but firm. Amy turned white, her eyes narrowing into slits. What is this? How dare you? She spat, facing the crowd. The room fell silent as everyone's eyes shifted from the screen to Amy. Ben rose, his face a mask of shock and confusion. Ben, this is a setup, Amy cried, looking wounded. They're lying. Ben shook his head, finally seeing the reality of her deceit. Amy, these are your statements. You've been lying to us all along. This isn't fair, Amy snarled, her mask slipping. You can't do this. I'm your sister. I think it's time you leave, Ben said quietly but with finality in his voice. Mutters of agreement filled the room as Amy stormed out, furious and humiliated. Once the door slammed shut behind her, the tension in the room eased, replaced by a sense of relief and vindication. You didn't have to do it this way, Ben said, his eyes meeting mine. This was the only way you would see the truth, Ben, I replied softly but firmly. She couldn't keep hurting us. The rest of the evening continued, subdued but supportive. Our friends and family rallied around us, offering comfort and understanding. As I looked around at the people who truly mattered, I felt a sense of closure. Ben and I stood together near the end of the party, hand in hand. "Thank you for standing by me," he said, his voice filled with gratitude. "We are stronger together," I replied, holding on to him tightly. And with that, we began the slow, steady process of healing and rebuilding our lives, free from the deceptive shadow of Amy. In the days following the party, Amy's exposure became the talk of our social circle. As relieved as I was to finally have the truth out, I knew the fallout was far from over. Ben was still grappling with the betrayal, and despite his firm stand at the party, he remained conflicted. One evening, as we sat down to dinner, Ben's phone rang. He glanced at it, sighed, and picked it up. "It's Amy." I braced myself, listening to his side of the conversation. "Amy, this isn't the time. No, you need to understand. No, I can't keep doing this. You need help, Amy. Goodbye." He hung up, looking drained. "She's still trying to play the victim," he said, his voice filled with frustration. "I'm not surprised," I said. "But you did the right thing, Ben. We need to focus on us now." Ben nodded but looked lost. "It's just hard to turn my back on her after all these years." I reached out and took his hand. "You're not turning your back on her, Ben. You're setting boundaries. There's a difference." A couple of days later, we decided it was time to publicly confront the situation with our friends and family once and for all. We gathered them at our house for a straightforward discussion. "I know everyone has heard bits and pieces about what happened with Amy," Ben began, his voice steady but emotional. "I want to clear the air and explain why we had to take such drastic steps." I stood by his side, feeling his hand tighten around mine for support. "Amy has been manipulating us for a long time. When we put the evidence together, it was clear she was taking advantage of Ben's kindness and our resources." There were murmurs of agreement and disbelief among the group. Our friends and family exchanged looks of sympathy and understanding. Ben's eyes scanned the room, filled with a mixture of apology and resolution. "I've realized that protecting her all these years only enabled her behavior. It was time to make a change." At that moment, the front door burst open. Amy stood there, her face flushed with anger. "How dare you? You're lying to everyone," she screamed. Gasps filled the room, and all eyes turned toward Amy. I felt my heart race, but I stood my ground. "Amy, you need to leave," I said firmly. "No, I'm setting the record straight," she shouted. "They've turned everyone against me with their lies." "Amy, you've done this to yourself," Ben said, his voice filled with a mixture of sadness and frustration. "We have the proof. Everyone has seen it. You think you can just cut me out of your life?" Amy spat, her eyes wild. "I'll find a way back. You'll see." "No, you won't," Ben replied with a finality that sent a chill down my spine. "You need to get help, Amy. Until then, you are no longer welcome here." Amy's face twisted with rage, but she could see the resolve in Ben's eyes. With one last venomous glare, she stormed out. The room remained silent, the weight of the confrontation lingering in the air. "Thank you all for being here," I said softly, my voice breaking the silence. "It's been a difficult journey, but with your support, we can move forward." Our friends and family approached us individually, offering hugs and words of comfort. As the evening came to a close, Ben and I stood together, emotionally exhausted but stronger for having faced the storm head-on. "We did the right thing," but Ben whispered, his voice strained but certain. "We did," I replied, leaning into him. We both knew that while the road to healing would be long, we were finally on the right path, together. The days following Amy's explosive exit from our home were a complex blend of relief and lingering tension. Ben and I tried to find our footing again, the house quiet without Amy's disruptive presence. One evening, as Ben and I sat quietly on the porch, sipping tea, he turned to me. "Rebecca, I know it's been hard on both of us. I want to thank you for standing by me through everything." I nodded, feeling his sincerity. "We are in this together, Ben. Always." Just as we were embracing a moment of peace, the piercing sound of the doorbell interrupted us. I exchanged a glance with Ben, sensing something was off. Opening the door, I found myself face to face with Amy. Her eyes were red, but it wasn't sorrow I saw there, it was fury. "What are you doing here, Amy?" Ben asked. His voice has a mix of concern and frustration. I'm here because you're my brother, and you're all I have left, she replied, her tone shifting to one of desperation. Amy, we've been through this. You need help we can't give you, I said, standing firm. Amy's eyes narrowed, and her voice turned venomous. So it's her or me, huh, Ben? Choose. Ben's face grew pale. Amy, please don't do this. Do what? Make you choose? You always choose her, don't you? Amy spat, her words slicing through the air. Amy. That's not fair, Ben replied, his voice shaking. It's not about choosing sides. You need to take responsibility. Responsibility? Amy scoffed. You're my brother. You promised to take care of me? There was a painful silence. I could see Ben's internal struggle written all over his face. He took a deep breath and stood taller. Amy, I love you, but you have to leave, Ben said quietly but firmly. You cannot keep coming back when things don't go your way. You're hurting yourself and us. Amy's face twisted in rage. You're throwing me away for her. I'll destroy you both. You need to leave, Amy, I said, my voice hardening. Now. With a last hate-filled glare, Amy stormed out of our lives once more, leaving us standing in a tense, heavy silence. As the darkness settled around us, I turned to Ben, seeing the pain in his eyes. Ben, we did what we had to, I said, trying to comfort him. I know, he replied, their voices trembling. It doesn't make it hurt any less. We went back inside, closing the door to the night and, symbolically, to Amy's toxic influence. There was a sadness in the air, but for the first time there was also a glimmer of hope. Ben, we'll get through this, I said, taking his hand. He nodded, squeezing my hand in return. Yes, we will, together. As we sat back on the couch, the quiet of our home felt strangely comforting. The journey had been rough, but the future now seemed a little less daunting. Together we were ready to rebuild what had been broken and look forward to a life free from Amy's shadow. Amy's departure marked a turning point for us. The house was calmer, and Ben and I were tentatively stepping into the healing process. Each morning felt lighter, but the memory of Amy's threats still loomed. One weekend, Ben and I decided to repaint the living room. It was a small act of reclaiming our space. As we worked, I sensed the unspoken tension easing with each stroke of the brush. This is therapeutic, Ben remarked, dipping his roller into the paint. Yeah, it feels like a fresh start, I replied, smiling. Later that week, Ben came home with a rare smile on his face. I got a promotion at work today, he announced. That's amazing, I said, wrapping my arms around him. Congratulations, Ben. Thanks, Rebecca, he said, his eyes sparkling. I couldn't have done it without your support. Our lives slowly began to stabilize. Yet, despite the progress, Amy's presence wasn't entirely gone. Sometimes we'd hear snippets about her from mutual acquaintances. Most of it wasn't good. Job rejections, broken relationships. Her manipulations had caught up with her. One evening, as we prepared dinner, Ben's phone buzzed with a text. He glanced at it and turned pale. It's from Peter, Amy's ex-boyfriend. What does he want? I asked, feeling a knot form in my stomach. He says Amy's really hit rock bottom. She's been reaching out to people, begging for help, but no one trusts her anymore, Ben said, his voice thick with emotion. Ben, you did everything you could, I said softly. She's facing the consequences of her actions. He nodded, eyes distant. I know, it's just hard to see her like this, even after everything. A few days later, while out grocery shopping, we ran into Jeff, my dad. He gave us both a tight hug. How are things, kids? We're doing better, Dad, I said. Jeff looked at Ben with a fatherly warmth. You two have been through the ringer, but I see you're coming out stronger. It's been tough, but we're getting there, Ben replied. As the weeks rolled by, the distance from Amy's toxic presence became more tangible. Our marriage felt renewed. We were rediscovering each other in ways we hadn't been able to before. On a quiet Sunday morning, Ben turned to me as we sipped our coffee on the porch. Rebecca, I know I've said this before, but I need you to understand just how much your support means to me. His words filled me with warmth. We're a team, Ben, and we'll get through anything together. Just then our neighbor Carol leaned over the fence. Morning, beautiful day, isn't it? Sure is, Carol, I responded, smiling. Carol looked hesitant but spoke up. I heard about Amy. Must have been hard, but you did the right thing, Rebecca. Thank you, Carol, Ben said, his voice filled with gratitude. As the days turned into months, the echoes of Amy's manipulations faded. We were rebuilding our lives, stronger and more united. Each step forward was a reminder that we had the strength to overcome anything, together. With every sunrise, our future felt brighter. The lessons of the past had made us resilient, and though the scars might remain, we were ready to embrace the new chapters of our story. What a joke! Derek's mocking voice echoed through the hallway, shattering my world into pieces. You really think that raggedy, upcycled garbage is going to sell? Wake up, sis. Raylan's living in a fantasy land. I froze, my heart pounding in my ears as I listened to my husband's scathing words, each one driving a fresh dagger into my soul. This wasn't some stranger criticizing my life's work. This was the man I'd loved and trusted, the father of my child. Harper's giggle cut through the stillness like a knife. Mom's so delusional. She honestly believes people will pay top dollar for old rags sewn together. Tears stung my eyes as the weight of their betrayal crashed down upon me. How could they be so cruel, so dismissive of the passion that fueled every stitch, every design born from repurposed materials? My dream wasn't just some whimsical flight of fancy. It was a commitment to sustainability, to breathing new life into the discarded. As their laughter subsided, I slipped away, my mind racing with a torrent of emotions, hurt, anger, determination. For too long, I'd turned a blind eye to Derek's subtle jabs and Harper's growing resentment. But this was a line crossed, a violation of trust that could never be undone. Later that night, as Derek snored beside me, oblivious to the storm brewing within, I made a decision. No more playing the victim. No more allowing them to trample my dreams underfoot. If they wanted to see me as a joke, I'd give them a punchline they'd never forget. The next morning, I called my best friend, Elise, a former lawyer with a razor-sharp mind. She was the only person I could trust with the truth, and the only one who could help me fight back. "Elise, I need your help," I whispered, glancing over my shoulder to ensure Derek hadn't overheard. "Things with Derek, they're not what they seem." Her voice was a lifeline, a beacon of clarity in the chaos. "Tell me everything." And so I did, laying bare the years of emotional neglect, the financial misdeeds I'd uncovered, and the gut-wrenching betrayal that had shattered my world. With each word, I felt a weight lifting, replaced by a steely resolve to take back control of my life and my business. "We'll make him pay," Elise vowed, her tone leaving no room for doubt. "Every penny he stole, every insult he hurled, he'll answer for it all. Starting today, we document everything." As I hung up the phone, a newfound sense of purpose coursed through my veins. The road ahead would be long and arduous, but I was done being the punchline. It was time to rewrite the joke, and this time, I'd be the one delivering the cutting final line. Elise didn't waste any time. Within days, she'd formulated a meticulous plan to expose Derek's misdeeds and secure my financial future. "First things first," she said during one of our clandestine meetings at a quiet cafe. "We need to document every single transaction he's made using your business accounts." I nodded, pulling out a thick manila envelope stuffed with bank statements and financial records. "I've been gathering evidence for months. Look at these numbers. He's been siphoning funds into his personal accounts, leaving me with just enough to keep the business afloat." Elise's brow furrowed as she flipped through the pages. "That snake, he's been embezzling from you this whole time." "It gets worse." I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the next revelation. "I overheard him on the phone with his banker last week. He's been lying about our profits, cooking the books to make it look like we're barely scraping by, so he can claim you're a financial burden and gain leverage in the divorce proceedings," Elise concluded, her jaw clenched tight. "Despicable." Our conversation was interrupted by the shrill ringing of my phone. Derek's name flashed across the screen, and I felt a surge of revulsion. Without hesitation, I declined the call and muted the ringer. Elise's eyes narrowed. What did that weasel want? Probably checking up on me, making sure his little cash cow is still producing. I spat the words like venom, years of pent-up resentment bubbling to the surface. Sliding a worn voice recorder across the table, Elise fixed me with a determined stare. "Start wearing this at all times. We need to catch him in the act, get him on record spewing his vitriol." The weight of the device in my palm felt heavy, a tangible reminder of the war I was waging. But I was done being a victim. It was time to fight back. That night, as Derek and I sat down for dinner, the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Harper picked at her food, her gaze flickering between us like a spectator at a boxing match. "What's gotten into you lately?" Derek sneered, breaking the uncomfortable silence. "You've been acting awfully strange." I took a deep breath, pressing the record button beneath the table. "Just focused on the business, that's all." "Just," he scoffed, stabbing at his steak with more force than necessary. "That little hobby of yours? Don't kid yourself, Ray. It's never going to amount to anything more than a drain on our finances." Harper's eyes widened, but she remained silent, no doubt fearing the wrath of her father's sharp tongue. "You know, Derek," I replied, keeping my voice measured and even, "for someone who claims to support my dreams, you sure have a funny way of showing it." His fork clattered against the plate as his fist slammed down on the table. "Support your dreams? Don't make me laugh. Every penny I've wasted on that ridiculous project is a penny too many." The words stung, but I refused to flinch. Instead, I met his venomous glare with a steely gaze of my own. "Well then, it's a good thing you won't have to waste any more of your precious money on me." Rising from the table, I fixed him with a cold smile. "I'll be sure to pack my bags tonight." As I left the room, Derek's sputtering protests fell on deaf ears. The war had begun, and I had no intention of losing. The atmosphere in the house was suffocating. Derek prowled the halls like a caged animal, his footsteps heavy with barely contained rage. Whenever our paths crossed, his eyes bored into me, searching for any sign of weakness, any crack in my resolute facade. But I refused to break. With each snide remark, each thinly veiled insult, I stood my ground, meeting his vitriol with stony silence. The recorder in my pocket became a talisman of sorts, a constant reminder of the evidence I was against him. Harper, caught in the crossfire, retreated into herself. Gone was the carefree teenager who once laughed and joked with her father. In her place was a hollow-eyed shadow, flinching at raised voices and avoiding us both whenever possible. It was during one of these encounters that the dam finally burst. "What's wrong, Princess?" Derek sneered as Harper scurried past, her gaze fixated on the floor. "Cat got your tongue?" She froze, her shoulders tensing, and for a moment I thought she might flee. But then, slowly, she turned to face him, and the look in her eyes sent a chill down my spine. "Just leave me alone," she muttered, her voice barely above a whisper. Derek threw back his head and laughed, a cruel, mocking sound that set my teeth on edge. "What's the matter? Daddy's little girl too good to talk to her old man now?" "Derek, that's enough." I stepped forward, placing a hand on Harper's trembling shoulder. She said, "Leave her alone." His gaze snapped to mine, eyes glittering with malice. "Stay out of this, Raylan. This is between me and my daughter." "Your daughter?" I echoed, my grip tightening on Harper's shoulder. "Since when do you give a damn about being a father? All you care about is yourself and your precious money." The words hung in the air, heavy and damning. For a heartbeat, Derek was speechless, his face contorting with rage. Then, like a coiled serpent, he struck. "How dare you?" he snarled, taking a step forward. "After everything I've done for this family, for your pathetic little hobby, and this is the thanks I get?" Harper flinched, shrinking back against me, but I stood my ground. Reaching into my pocket, I thumbed the record button, capturing every venomous word. "You've done nothing but belittle me, Derek, lie to me, steal from me. You're a despicable excuse for a husband and a father." His face turned an ugly shade of purple, and for a moment, I thought he might strike me. But then, as quickly as it had come, the storm passed, and he deflated like a punctured balloon. "You'll regret this," he hissed, jabbing a finger in my face. "Mark my words, Raylan, I'll make sure you lose everything." With that, he turned on his heel and stormed off, leaving Harper and me alone in the oppressive silence. "Mom?" Her voice was small, tremulous. "What's going on?" Wrapping an arm around her shoulders, I pulled her close, grateful for the solid weight of her against my side. "It's going to be okay, sweetie," I murmured, more for my own benefit than hers. "Everything's going to be just fine." But as I gazed down the hall where Derek had disappeared, a tendril of doubt wormed its way into my heart. Had I underestimated his capacity for cruelty? His willingness to drag us all down in his quest for vengeance? Only time would tell. And in the meantime, I would keep fighting. Keep gathering ammunition for the battle to come. Because one thing was certain. I would never let that man break me again. The day had finally come. With Elise's guidance, I'd compiled an ironclad case against Derek. complete with financial records, audio recordings, and a mountain of damning evidence. There would be no more running, no more hiding. It was time to rip off the mask and expose him for the monster he truly was. "Are you sure about this?" Elise's voice was gentle but laced with steel as we went over the plan one final time. "Once you confront him, there's no going back." I took a deep, steadying breath, my fingers tightening around the thick manila envelope containing the fruits of our labor. "I'm sure. He needs to answer for what he's done." A soft knock at the door shattered the tense silence. "Mom? Elise? It's me, Harper." My heart clenched at the weariness in her voice, a painful reminder of the toll this war had taken on her young spirit. Elise shot me a questioning look, and I nodded, bracing myself for the inevitable explosion. "Come in, sweetie." The door creaked open, and Harper slipped inside, her eyes wide and haunted. "Dad's home," she whispered, wringing her hands. "He's in the living room, waiting for you." My mouth went dry, but I refused to let my nerves show. Squaring my shoulders, I turned to Elise. "It's time." She squeezed my arm, offering a grim smile. "I've got your back, let's do this." With Harper trailing behind, we made our way to the living room, each footstep echoing like a death knell. Derek looked up as we entered, his eyes narrowing at the sight of Elise. "What's going on here?" he demanded, rising to his feet. "What's she doing in my house?" I opened my mouth to respond, but Elise beat me to it. "Sit down, Derek," she said, her voice ringing with authority. "We need to have a little chat." He bristled, his jaw clenching. "I don't take orders from—" "Sit down." Elise's tone brooked no argument, and after a tense moment, Derek lowered himself back onto the couch, his eyes smoldering with barely concealed rage. Sliding the envelope onto the coffee table, I fixed him with an icy glare. "These are detailed financial records, documenting every single penny you've embezzled from my business over the past 5 years. His eyes widened, but he quickly regained his composure, scoffing dismissively. "You're delusional. I've done nothing but support your little hobby. Save it." I jabbed a finger at the envelope. "The evidence is right there, plain as day, bank statements, wire transfers, everything." Derek opened his mouth, no doubt to spew forth another round of lies and denials, but I cut him off. "That's not all." Pulling out my phone, I queued up the first in a long line of audio recordings. "I have hours of footage documenting your emotional abuse, your constant belittling and degradation." As his own voice filled the room, hurling insults and venom with chilling casualness, Derek's face drained of color. Harper gasped, her hands flying to her mouth as she listened to her father's hateful words. "No." Derek's voice was little more than a hoarse croak. "You can't. That's not—" "It's over, Derek." Elise's voice was cold, utterly devoid of mercy. "We have more than enough evidence to bury you in court. You're going to jail, and Raylan is taking everything, the house, the business, full custody of Harper. You've lost." For a long moment, silence reigned, broken only by the sound of Derek's ragged breathing. Then, slowly, he turned to face me, and the look in his eyes sent ice flooding through my veins. "You'll regret this," he hissed, spittle flying from his lips. "I swear to God, Raylan, I'll make you suffer for this. You and that little brat will wish you'd never been born." Before I could respond, Harper was there, stepping between us with her shoulders thrown back and her chin raised in defiant challenge. "That's enough out of you," she spat, her voice trembling but unwavering. "You're the one who's going to suffer, you pathetic excuse for a father, and you'll have no one to blame but yourself." Pride swelled in my chest as I watched my daughter stand tall against the man who'd tormented us for so long. In that moment, I knew we would be okay. We would survive this nightmare, and maybe, just maybe, we'd emerge stronger than ever before. Derek opened his mouth, but whatever vile retort he'd intended died on his lips. With a snarl of impotent rage, he turned and stormed from the room, leaving us standing in silence amidst the wreckage of his shattered lies. It was over. The war had been won. The silence that followed Derek's departure was deafening. Harper and I stood frozen, still processing the explosive confrontation that had just unfolded. Elise was the first to break the stillness, letting out a long, shuddering breath. "Well, that could have gone better," she muttered, running a hand through her disheveled hair. Harper whirled on her, eyes blazing with a mixture of hurt and anger. "You think? That was my dad you just destroyed back there." "Harper," I began, reaching out to her, but she jerked away, hugging herself tightly. Don't. Just don't. Her voice cracked, and I watched in dismay as tears spilled down her cheeks. How could you do this, Mom? How could you keep this from me? The accusation in her tone was like a physical blow, stealing the breath from my lungs. Sweetie, I was just trying to protect you. Protect me? She let out a harsh, bitter laugh. From what? The truth? The fact that my own father is a lying, cheating scumbag? Each word lanced through me, raw and agonizing. Elise stepped forward, her expression softening. Harper, your mom did what she had to do to keep you both safe. Derek is a dangerous man, and I don't want to hear it. Harper exploded, whirling on Elise with clenched fists. You have no idea what you've done, what this is going to do to our family. The anguish in her voice cut me to the core. I wanted nothing more than to take her in my arms, to shield her from the pain and betrayal that had torn our lives asunder. But I knew, deep down, that this was a wound that could not be salved with empty platitudes or motherly affection. This was a hurt that ran bone deep, a festering wound that had been ripped open and left to bleed. Harper, please. I tried again, fighting to keep my voice steady. I never wanted to lie to you, but Derek, he was out of control. He was stealing from me, sabotaging my business, and I was afraid if I told you the truth, he might. Might what? She spat, rounding on me with fresh venom. Hurt us? Abandon us? Well, congratulations, Mom, because now he's going to do both of those things, and so much worse. Her words hit their mark, and I flinched as if struck. Because deep down I knew she was right. In my quest for justice, for vengeance against the man who had betrayed and belittled me, I had set in motion a chain of events that would undoubtedly tear our family apart. Derek's fury knew no bounds, and now that he had been backed into a corner, exposed as the monster he truly was, there was no telling how far he might go to make us pay. A small, traitorous voice whispered that perhaps it would have been better to simply cut my losses, to walk away and start anew. But I knew, in my heart of hearts, that such a path would have led only to more pain, more suffering at his hands. No, I had done the right thing, the only thing I could do to protect Harper and myself from his toxic influence. But that knowledge did little to dull the ache of my daughter's resentment, the guilt that gnawed at my soul for the turmoil I had thrust upon her. I'm sorry, I whispered, the words feeling hopelessly inadequate. I'm so sorry. For a long moment Harper simply stared at me, her expression unreadable. Then, without another word, she turned and fled the room, leaving me standing amidst the wreckage of our fractured family. Elise's hand found my shoulder, squeezing gently. Give her time, she'll come around. But as I listened to the distant echo of Harper's footsteps, rapidly retreating, I couldn't help but wonder if the damage I had wrought was too deep, too catastrophic to ever be undone. The divorce proceedings were brutal, a no-holds-barred battle fueled by years of pent-up resentment and betrayal. Derek, his back against the wall, fought like a cornered animal, lashing out with every underhanded tactic in the book. She's an unfit mother, he snarled during one particularly heated hearing, his eyes boring into me with undisguised hatred. Manipulative, vindictive. Is that really the kind of influence you want around an impressionable young girl? I bit back the urge to retaliate, forcing myself to remain composed as Elise rose to my defense. Your Honor, these baseless accusations are nothing more than a desperate attempt to distract from the real issue at hand, Mr. Collins' repeated embezzlement and financial malfeasance. Derek's face purpled, but before he could unleash another volley of vitriol, the judge intervened. That's enough, Mr. Collins. I've seen the evidence, and it paints a very clear picture of your actions. Unless you have something of substance to add, I suggest you remain silent. Seething, Derek slumped back in his chair, glowering at me from beneath hooded brows. The message in his eyes was clear. This was far from over. With each passing day, the divisions within our shattered family grew deeper and more pronounced. Harper, caught in the crossfire, retreated further into herself, alternating between bouts of stony silence and explosive outbursts directed at both Derek and me. I hate you both, she raged one night, hurling a glass against the wall with enough force to shatter it into 1,000 pieces. You've ruined everything. I flinched as shards exploded around me, piercing my skin with 1,000 tiny lacerations. But the physical pain paled in comparison to the agony of watching my little girl unravel before my eyes. Derek, of course, seized the opportunity to drive the wedge deeper, pulling Harper aside and no doubt filling her head with his twisted version of events. "Don't listen to a word that lying bitch says," I overheard him hiss, his voice dripping with venom. "She's poison, Harper, and she'll only drag you down with her." Part of me wanted to intervene, to shield my daughter from his toxic influence, but a larger, wiser part knew that such actions would only breed more resentment, more ammunition for Derek's manipulative games. So I kept my distance, focusing my energy on the legal battle that would decide the course of our future. With Elise's guidance, I pored over financial statements and witness testimonies, building an impenetrable case against the man who had once sworn to love and cherish me. The realization that our marriage had devolved into this bitter adversarial farce left a hollow ache in my chest. But I knew there was no going back, no chance of salvaging what had been lost. Derek had made his choices, and now he would have to face the consequences. As the divorce proceedings ground on, the media caught wind of our sordid drama, unleashing a torrent of salacious headlines and intrusive reporters. Derek, ever the opportunist, seized his chance to manipulate the narrative, granting exclusive interviews where he painted himself as the long-suffering victim of a deranged, money-hungry shrew. "She's out for blood, plain and simple," he lamented to one particularly eager journalist, his eyes glistening with crocodile tears. "All I ever wanted was to give my family a good life, but it was never enough for Raylan. She let her greed, her delusions of grandeur consume her." I watched in disgust as his lies played out across newspapers and television screens, each fabrication more outrageous than the last. But I refused to take the bait, to engage in the same mudslinging tactics that Derek had embraced so wholeheartedly. No, I would let the evidence speak for itself. The truth was on my side, and try as he might, Derek could never bury that beneath a mountain of deceit and slander. As the media frenzy reached a fever pitch, I found myself longing for the quiet solace of my work, the simple act of creation that had once brought me such joy and fulfillment. But even that refuge had been tainted, the very business I had poured my heart and soul into, now serving as a battleground between Derek and me. In my darkest moments, I wondered if it had all been worth it, the pain, the betrayal, the shattering of everything I had once held dear. But then I would look at Harper, my beautiful, struggling girl caught in the crossfire of her parents' war, and I would know that I had done the only thing I could. For her sake, and for my own self-respect, I had to keep fighting. No matter how high the cost, I would not let Derek emerge victorious from the ashes of our family. Not this time. The day of the final court hearing dawned cold and gray, the somber weather mirroring the weight that had settled over my shoulders. As Elise and I made our way through the courthouse doors, a phalanx of reporters descended upon us, cameras flashing and microphones thrust into our faces. "Miss Collins, is it true you're seeking full custody of your daughter? How do you respond to the allegations that you've been embezzling funds from your own company? Care to comment on the rumors of your husband's alleged affair?" I brushed past them without a word, my jaw clenched in grim determination. Derek, of course, was reveling in the spectacle, pausing every few steps to preen for the cameras and offer up sound bites tailored to paint him as the long-suffering victim. "All I've ever wanted is to protect my little girl," he simpered, his expression one of studied anguish. "But Raylan, she's become unhinged, obsessed with money and revenge. It's tragic, really." I felt Elise tense beside me, and I placed a warning hand on her arm. "Don't take the bait," I murmured. "He's not worth it." Her nostrils flared, but she gave a curt nod, and we continued on our way, leaving Derek to bask in the spotlight he so desperately craved. The courtroom was packed to the rafters, a veritable circus of lawyers, journalists, and gawking spectators. I scanned the crowd, my heart lurching as I spotted Harper sitting towards the back, her shoulders hunched and her gaze determinedly averted from both Derek and me. As the proceedings got underway, it became immediately apparent that the judge had little patience for Derek's grandstanding. He cut through the other man's bloated testimony with razor-sharp precision, dismantling his arguments one by one with cold, irrefutable logic. "You claim your wife was obsessed with money and revenge, Mr. Collins," the judge stated, his voice ringing with thinly veiled disdain. And yet, the financial records clearly show that you embezzled over $500,000 from her company's accounts over the course of 5 years. How do you explain that? Derek squirmed in his seat, his bravado faltering under the weight of the damning evidence. It was a misunderstanding, Your Honor. I was simply lying and stealing from your wife, with whom you had entered into a legal contract as a business partner, the judge interrupted, his eyes flashing. That's what the evidence shows, Mr. Collins. Shall I go on? As the judge methodically disassembled Derek's house of lies, I could practically feel the weight lifting from my shoulders. Beside me, Elise radiated quiet triumph, her lips curved into the faintest of smiles. When the judge finally rendered his verdict, it felt like a physical blow, knocking the wind from Derek's sails and leaving him reeling. In light of the overwhelming evidence presented, I am awarding Miss Collins full ownership of her company, as well as sole custody of her daughter, Harper. Mr. Collins, you are hereby ordered to pay restitution in the amount of $600,000, as well as alimony and child support to be determined at a later date. A stunned silence fell over the courtroom, broken only by the muted sobs of a devastated Derek. Elise reached over and squeezed my hand, her eyes shining with pride. You did it, she murmured. It's over. But as I turned to face my daughter, my heart plummeted. Harper was staring at me, her expression unreadable, a chasm of hurt and betrayal stretching between us. In that moment, I knew that while the legal battle might be won, the war for my daughter's heart and trust was only just beginning. In the days that followed, Derek's world crumbled around him. His assets were seized, his reputation in tatters. But through it all, he maintained a defiant front, lashing out at anyone and everyone who dared cross his path. It was during one such outburst that Harper, who had been steadfastly avoiding me, finally emerged from the shadows of her self-imposed exile. You're pathetic, she spat, her voice dripping with contempt as Derek raged and raved in the aftermath of yet another court ruling. All this time, I thought Mom was the one destroying this family, but you're the real cancer, aren't you? Derek whirled on her, his face contorted in an ugly snarl. Watch your mouth, you ungrateful little... No, you watch yours. Harper stepped forward, her chin raised in defiant challenge. I'm done listening to your lies, your manipulations. You're a sad, bitter man, and you've got no one to blame but yourself for the mess you've made of your life. As her words washed over him, I saw something shift in Derek's eyes, a flicker of doubt, of dawning realization that his carefully constructed facade was crumbling. For a heartbeat, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Then the moment passed, and the sneer was back, twisted and grotesque. You'll regret this, he hissed, jabbing a finger in Harper's face. You and your bitch of a mother will regret the day you ever crossed me. Harper didn't so much as flinch. Save it for someone who still cares, Dad. You're nothing but a pathetic bully, and I'm done being afraid of you. With that, she turned and walked away, leaving Derek gaping in her wake like a landed fish. Our eyes met for the briefest of moments, and in that fleeting glance I saw a glimmer of the old Harper, strong, defiant, unbroken. In that moment, I knew that no matter what lay ahead, we would face it together, united, emboldened by the truth that had finally set us free. Derek might have lost everything, but I had regained something far more precious, my daughter's respect, her trust. And that was a victory worth fighting for. The weeks following the divorce were a whirlwind of activity. With Derek's vindictive presence finally excised from our lives, Harper and I were free to pick up the pieces and begin rebuilding. Gone were the tense silences, the hostile glares and cutting remarks. In their place was a newfound openness, a willingness to communicate and heal the wounds that had been left to fester for far too long. I'm sorry, Mom, Harper murmured one night as we sat on the patio, nursing mugs of hot chocolate beneath the star-studded sky, for the way I acted, for shutting you out when you needed me most. I reached over and squeezed her hand, my heart swelling with a potent mix of love and relief. You have nothing to apologize for, sweetie. What's important is that we're here now, together. That's all that matters. She offered a tentative smile, and in that moment, I saw a glimpse of the carefree girl she had once been, untainted by the bitter rancor of her parents' war. The sight filled me with a renewed sense of determination. I would do whatever it took to shield her from further pain, to ensure that the damage wrought by Derek's actions did not define the rest of her life. With that goal in mind, I threw myself into resurrecting my fashion line, channeling all the fire and passion that had once fueled my every design. Harper, to my immense pride, joined me wholeheartedly, her artistic flair and keen eye breathing fresh life into my creations. "You know, this whole sustainability thing is actually kind of cool," she remarked one afternoon as we pored over a pile of discarded fabric swatches. "Who knew old rags could look so chic?" I laughed, reveling in the sound of her teasing lilt. "I tried to tell you, didn't I? But you were too busy mocking your poor, delusional mother." She pulled a face, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment. "Yeah, well, I was young and stupid. Not to mention, brainwashed by a certain lying snake of a father. The barb stung, but I knew there was no venom behind it, only the stark truth that we were both still coming to terms with." Reaching out, I cupped her cheek, marveling at the way she leaned into my touch rather than recoiling. "The important thing is, we're here now, together, and nothing is ever going to tear us apart again." The words felt like a vow, a solemn promise to the both of us. Harper's eyes glistened with unshed tears, but she blinked them away, offering me a watery smile. "You're right. It's you and me against the world, Mom. Always and forever." As our new line began to take shape, the media caught wind of our triumphant reemergence, fueling a flurry of interest and speculation. Interview requests poured in, each more eager than the last to get the inside scoop on our phoenix-like rise from the ashes of scandal and betrayal. I dismissed them all with a polite but firm refusal. This story, our story, was not fodder for the gossip rags or salacious tell-alls. It was ours, a hard-won victory forged in the fires of pain and heartbreak. The only validation I needed was the look of pride in Harper's eyes as we put the finishing touches on our debut collection. Gone were the dark circles and haunted gaze. In their place was a radiant, effervescent joy that warmed me to my very core. "We did it, Mom," she breathed, running her fingers over the intricate stitching of one particularly striking ensemble. "Against all odds, we actually pulled this off." Wrapping an arm around her shoulders, I pulled her close, savoring the moment. "Of course we did, baby girl. When have you ever known your mother to back down from a fight?" She laughed, the sound ringing like music through the bustling studio. "Fair point. Though to be honest, I think it was my stubborn determination that really saved the day." "Is that so?" I arched an eyebrow, unable to resist the playful banter. "Well, in that case, maybe I should start calling you Mom instead." Harper made a face, sticking out her tongue. "On second thought, let's not go that far. One diva in the family is more than enough." We dissolved into a fit of giggles, the easy camaraderie a soothing balm on the wounds of the past. In that moment, it was as if the years of turmoil and heartache had never happened. We were just a mother and daughter, united in our love for each other and the craft that had helped heal us both. The night of our launch party, I could scarcely believe how far we'd come. Harper was radiant in one of our signature creations, her megawatt smile lighting up the room as she worked the crowd with effortless poise. Watching her charm and dazzle the assembled fashionistas and industry bigwigs, I felt a surge of pride so intense it nearly stole my breath away. This was her moment, our moment, and no one, not Derek, not the naysayers who had doubted us at every turn, could ever take that away. As the night drew to a close and the last of the well-wishers trickled out, Harper made her way over to me, her eyes sparkling with unbridled joy. "Well," she murmured, looping her arm through mine, "what did you think? Was it everything you dreamed it would be?" Pulling her close, I pressed a kiss to her temple, my heart so full I thought it might burst. "It was more than I ever could have imagined," I whispered fiercely, "and it's only the beginning, baby girl, for both of us." As we stood there, silhouetted against the twinkling lights of our newfound success, I knew that no matter what challenges the future held, we would face them head-on, side by side, unbroken, unstoppable, invincible. A mother and daughter, forged in the fires of adversity and tempered by the indomitable strength of our bond. Our story was far from over. It had only just begun.